Good morning. It is Monday, the 22nd of June. Summer is finally here for those of you who've been waiting on it. And for those of us who've been dreading it, it'll only last 3 months and we'll be back to more seasonable weather. The fruit of the Spirit for today is the fruit of goodness. Goodness, of course, is throughout the Old and New Testament. It is out of goodness that God chooses to create everything that is. God doesn't need it. God isn't desperate to have it. God, in His goodness, chooses to create it. It says, "Let there be light." It is out of goodness that God promises Abraham that Abraham will be a blessing to all nations, he and his seed. It is out of goodness that God makes the covenant with Israel that He will be their God and they will be His people. It is out of goodness that God brings them back from exile and reestablishes them in the land. And it is out of goodness that God sends the Christ. Now, in that context, goodness becomes a great value for us. We might think of goodness in terms of doing the right thing. We might think of goodness in terms of personal integrity. Usually there's an element of kindness. If you consider someone you've known who was good, you've known them to be kind. And there's an element of generosity as well. In fact, some translations of Galatians 5:22, we might be into 23 by now. Some of those translations have, instead of goodness, generosity. And you've known generous people. To be a good person is somebody who is giving, and quite the opposite, to be a stingy person who is always taking and never giving is not what we would consider good. So generosity is an element as well. I remember a fellow showed up once at church with a brand new shirt. It was a very nice looking shirt, kind of a doubled in the front and doubled on the sleeves, and, very attractive. And where'd you get the shirt? I said, "Oh, I got this. Some lady gave this to me." "Oh, that was very kind of her." Well, lo and behold, 10, 15 minutes later, out starts crawling bed bugs that were in the shirt. Turned out to be not as good of a gift as he thought. But that's just ambiguity. The lady didn't know there were bed bugs in the shirt. She had gotten it from somebody else and thought she would be generous and caring. Ambiguity marks everything in a fallen world. There are very few gifts that you can think of that are unambiguously good. And it brings us to the final paradigm of goodness for Christians. And that is, the final paradigm of goodness is Jesus, who quite unnecessarily paid a debt He did not owe for you and for me who have a debt that we cannot pay. He did so out of His goodness. He did so out of a goodness that gives and does not count the cost. He did so out of a goodness which desires the welfare of the other, even at one's own detriment. He did so out of a goodness that is faithful to God and seeks to implement the will of God above all else. Have a good day in your practice of goodness.